Okay, so in this chapter, we're going to be learning how to solve problems 4 different ways. In Unit 3, Lesson 2, it's called solving using the square root method. And the square root method only works if you have only x squareds in your question. So let me clarify. If you have a question that says x squared minus x minus 6 equals 0, we cannot use the square root method on this one. The reason why is because this x right here messes everything up. It can only have an x squared in the problem. Now you can have multiple x squareds, just not a regular x to the first power. So this problem in blue would not be ideal for the square root method. So I have a few examples down here, and they're broken up to sort of match the stuff that you're going to learn on Canvas. The first example is just a basic question. Now solving these problems is just like solving regular problems. It just adds one extra step at the end. So if I'm going to solve for x, I need to get rid of this plus or this minus 7. So I'm going to plus 7 to both sides. So that's going to give me negative 50 equals 2x squared. And then I need to try to get this x by itself, so I need to get rid of the 2. So I have to divide by 2, divide by 2. So then we're left with x squared equals negative 25. Now at this point, we have isolated the x squared. So to get the squared to go away, all we have to do is take the square root. Now if we take the square root to the other side, there's going to be a small problem. But the good thing is, in the previous lesson, in Unit 3, Lesson 1, you learned how to fix this. You cannot take the square root of a problem that has a negative inside. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to fix it by taking it out of the radical and changing it to the letter I. Once we do that, now we just have the regular square root of 25. Now one thing you should also be aware of is anytime you square root both sides, it gives you 2 answers. It gives you a plus and a minus answer. So now that we've fixed the negative inside the square root, now that it's a regular 25, we can just square root 25. The square root of 25 is 5. And then we had the I, so I'm going to put the I after. And then we had the plus or minus in front. So x equals plus or minus 5i. So one other thing I want to tell you is we're always going to have 2 answers because it's an x squared. So there's an answer for every single x in the question. Okay. Next question. The next type of question involves fractions. I know a lot of people don't like them, but it's not a big deal because you can just use reciprocals to get rid of them, but you have to use them in the right time. So just like before, we're going to try to get the x squared by itself. So I'm going to plus 1 to both sides, and this is going to give me 8 equals 2/3 x squared. Now we're not quite ready to take the square root yet because we have the fraction out in front. So to get rid of the fraction, we're just going to multiply by the reciprocal. So I'm going to multiply by 3/2, and I'm going to multiply this side by 3/2. When I multiply the fraction by its reciprocal, it crosses out. So now we're just going to be left with that x squared. So x squared equals, and then you can go over to your calculator, and you can type in 8 times 3/2. So fractions are not that big of a deal because you have calculators that do fractions. So now we have that x squared all by itself, so we're ready to do the last step. And this will be the last step every time on the square root problem. So we're going to square root, or the squared problem, sorry. We're going to square root both sides. Square root is always our last step. So right away, that's going to give us a plus and a minus. And I'm going to go ahead and type this in the calculator. So I'm going to hit Shift, x squared, put in the 12. And it does something funky, but we'll learn about that in another chapter. So just trust what the calculator says. So we're going to write down 2 square root 3, and then x equals. So remember, this counts as 2 answers. The problem is x squared, so we should have 2 answers, and the plus 2 square root 3 is 1, minus 2 square root 3 is the second. And then the other type of question is when you have x on both sides. So you'll notice that this time, this problem has an x on the left, but it also has an x on the right. That's not that big a deal because all we have to do is get all of the x's to one side. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 8x squared. I'm going to subtract 8x squared from here. That way I get all of my x's over to this side. So I'm going to have negative 3x squared minus 2 equals negative 74. And be careful with this minus sign. A lot of people lose it. It has to be attached to that 74 when you bring it down. Once you get all the x's to one side, it's just like the problem before. So now we're going to try to get the x squared all by itself. So we're going to square it, or we're going to add 2 to both sides. That gives us negative 72 equals negative 3x squared. And then I'm going to have to divide both sides by negative 3. And then I'm going to have x squared equals, let's go ahead and do that one in the calculator. So 72 divided by 3, and it's 24. So this equals 24, and then I can just finally take the square root. So square root, square root. Remember, immediately we put a plus and a minus. So we're going to have x equals, and then we type square root of 24 in the calculator. Square root 24. So the answer is 2 square root 6. Now the last type of question that you're going to see on Canvas is an application problem. It's a little bit of review from geometry last year. You're going to have to use Pythagorean's theorem because it has a right triangle, and you're going to try to find the missing side. And that's exactly what Pythagorean's theorem is set up for. So with Pythagorean's theorem, the only side that really matters is the C side. The C side, it has to be your hypotenuse. The hypotenuse of a triangle is always located across from this 90-degree angle. So it's always going to be your longest side. So that means this part right here has to be C. A and B, they're interchangeable. So it doesn't really matter which one you make A and which one you make B, as long as they're, they're the legs of your triangle. And you'll know if they're the legs because the legs form the box. So they form that 90-degree angle. So I'm going to go ahead and make A equal to X and B equal to 15. So using Pythagorean's theorem in substitution, I'm going to have X squared plus 15 squared equals 21 squared. And technically, all of this stuff should be in parentheses, and I wasn't going to put them because they're all positive anyways. If there was any negatives involved, which there aren't going to be because you can't have negative lengths, we would definitely have to use those parentheses. So 15 squared is 225. Then over here, this is just x squared. And then 21 squared, that's 441. And then we just use the same steps as all of the other problems. We want to try to isolate our x squared, so we're going to subtract 225 from both sides. So 441 minus 225 is 216. And then the final step, because this x squared is isolated, we just take the square root, so that immediately gives us a plus and minus answer. So I'm going to do the square root of 216, which ends up being 6 square root 6. So there's our answer. Then the last questions, they're just practice problems of the different types. So if you notice this one, it's got x on both sides. So we want to get all of the x's to one side. And it doesn't matter what side you get them to, as long as you separate the x's from the numbers. I like getting them on the left though. So I'm going to subtract 4x from this, or 4x squared. So this is going to give me 11 minus 3x squared equals 5. Then I'm going to subtract 11, because remember, we're trying to kind of sort this all out. The x's went to the left, so I want all of my numbers to head over to the right. And when they go to the other side, they just change signs. So I have negative 3x squared equals negative 6. Then I have to divide by negative 3 on both sides. So that gives us x squared equals 2. So we square root and square root. So that means that x is equal to plus or minus square root 2. Okay, next question again, fractions. Don't worry about the fraction until later. So let's start the problem just like normal. We're going to subtract 3 from both sides. So that right there is going to be 24 is equal to x squared over 16. So when we have a fraction, we want to multiply by the reciprocal. And technically there's a 1 here. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 16 over 1. And again, if you have a 1 at the bottom, you don't have to really write it. So you just have to multiply by 16. So I'm going to take 24, multiply that by 16. And it's 384. So I'm left with x squared. And then finally, since the x squared is all by itself, we can take the square root. And again, before I even put in the calculator, I put the plus and minus, because there's always going to be a plus and minus on every single one of these questions. So it's going to be square root 384. And then our final answer is 8 square root 6. Now on Canvas, you may have to convert this to a decimal. So if you convert this to a decimal, you just have to hit the FD button and it'll do it for you. Okay. And then let's see, I don't know if there's another, oh yeah, there's the application question. So again, when you do Pythagorean's theorem, the side across from the 90-degree angle, the longest side, it has to be the C. So C is equal to 12. A and B, they're going to be interchangeable, so it doesn't really matter. So I mean, you can make this A and this B. So we would have 8 squared plus y squared. And again, I'm just going to go ahead and throw these in parentheses, even though in this question it doesn't matter, equals 12 squared. So we're going to have 64 plus y squared equals 144. And then we're going to subtract 64 from both sides. So if we subtract 144 minus 64, probably help if I put a minus sign in there, we end up with 80. So I have y squared equals 80. I'm going to square root both sides. Oh, and I just thought of this. This is the only question where you don't have to put plus or minus because you can't have a minus length. The measurement of a triangle has to be positive. So we're not going to put the plus or minus on this question. I may have done that earlier, but that was my mistake. So square root of 80 is 4 square root 5. And if they wanted the decimal, we can just go ahead and hit the FD button. And you'll have to read the directions to see how far they want you to round it. If they say to the nearest whole number, we would say that the answer is 9. If they said to the nearest tenth, we would say the answer is 8.9. And if they said to the nearest hundredth, we'd say it's 8.94. But that's all Unit 3, Lesson 2 is all about. So now you should have enough information to work in Canvas.